Hi, I'm Pat Zalewski, and what I'd like to talk about today is the Enochian system and the Golden Dawn. uh, like most people, when I first read the Enochian system, it was through the works of Israel Regardie and his Golden Dawn, the Welland Publications volume. The and like most people, the whole intrigue of the Enochian system captured me to a point where I started to do my own research on it, and I uncovered individual workings by various people. And what I decided to do then was to develop a book on it. But that was the basic essence of the system itself. And Rigardi made the point that it was a pinnacle of the Golden Dawn system. Crowley's work on the Aries also indicated a certain amount of strong possibilities the Enochian system went a bit further than what it actually did in his Equinox volumes and also his own individual works. And the trick was to do it, and like everyone else, I did the Enochian tablets and things on those basis and worked out a set of squares and produced an Enochian chess set. Well, that was before I even met the people from Forero. And when I went up there, to my utter astonishment, I found out that the Enochian system that had been touted as something of a major pinnacle by different people was actually just a byproduct of something normal as part of the ritual. For them in New Zealand, the ritual was king, and I was assured that this was done the way it was at Bristol Temple, and based on that, I think it's a fair assumption that this was done from the Golden Dawn, and yet quite an elaborate uh, amount of space has been put to actually working through the actual tablets, constructing them, and so forth and so on, which is which puts things totally out of proportion to what it was. The Enochian system within the Golden Dawn, as it was taught originally, first of all, was never coloured in the multicolours in the outer order. It was the old system that you see within the some of the D manuscripts by Casburn and things along those lines, where it was black, white, and red was the basic colouring. That was just the lettering. So when you look at the system, you realise that the colours, the three colours, were also the colours of the cloaks of the officers on the floor, etc. And the three alchemical colours as well. So there's a correlation chip there that everything had those three essential colours. Uh, you never got to see the full coloured tablets that you would in until you got to the inner order, and they're on the vault door. That was the first time you ever saw them in colour. And the pyramids, which incidentally were flat, they were never truncated, were there you to put the god forms on, and also to work for Enochian chess. Now, I had contacted quite a few people in the old order, which I've mentioned in other videos, and really, even though the interest wasn't that strong on Enochiana, it was covered, and everyone I spoke to told me exactly the same thing. Essentially, what it came down to was this: the tablets were elemental; they never got higher than the elemental levels. They were in a seer, and therefore just part and parcel of the ritual. And they had to fit within the ritual. The ritual didn't have to fit within them. And therefore, when Rigardi came out to meet me in '83, we had a pretty good discussion on the Enochian system, and he disagreed to a certain extent with my thoughts on for what I knew about the Enochian system and what I was taught. He said he thought it was more fundamental than that, and I said no, it wasn't. The actual all the multi pages of manuscripts on the Enochiana was to get people into the ZAM and get them working on, or NOM in some cases, get them to work on their elemental weapons and do all the practical stuff. The Enochian system, as it was taught by creating the squares, you would look at the different systems within the tablets. Now they're all elementals. They never got beyond that. And so if you have a good look at when you do the invocations in the elemental rituals, so-called, in the Golden Dawn, you'll see they don't rank highly on the front. They're there. They're called as part of the elemental basis, but they're not the major player, nor they are referred to. The only time that you have a central focus on the Enochian system is is in the portal ritual when you have the tablet of union on the center, and that's used as a binding factor which allows the tablet of spirit, which allows it to come together. So they work strictly on an elemental basis. Now, as an elemental basis, it has its limits. It can't go beyond a certain point. Now, this may surprise some of you who think, oh, what a wonderful system it is, but you have a good look at it. Now, in the Mathers in the ZAM concentrate on the Servian squares. You would work out where the Servian squares were, you'd work out the God forms of the Servian squares, who was what, and then you would put them all together and you say, okay, well, that's a good solid basis for it. And the idea, as I understand it, was that he was going to work his way through. In the THAM, he looked at the cherubics, and then the next step would have been probably in the PHAM would have been the Calvary cross, then it would have been the major crosses, etc. and the tablets, and finally they would have probably had the Adeptus Minor. They would have most likely worked on the tablet of union for a brief discussion. But while everything was laid out pretty straightforward in the ZAM papers on Enochian, when you get to the THAM, which is not well known, what all they really did was they took the names of the God forms from the chess pieces, and they associated those under Yod-He Vav-He to the cherubics. And when they did that, they did nothing on what they were supposed to do. They did nothing on how they related to the tablets, and they did nothing about how they related in rituals. All they did was a basic summary of the etymology of the actual names. There's two versions of this paper. The first was written by Westcott, which is a page and a half, and the other one was by Mathers. We extended what Westcott did into 16 pages, which was the way they did it. There was an introductory one, and later there was another version again. So, and this paper was an absolute bitter disappointment, because it tried to talk about the God forms. He got horribly lost in it, and he looked at etymology. Frankly, I thought he lost the plot. So you had this, and that's the way, as far as I can make out, he was going to look at the Enochian system within the GD. When I started my own studies on Enochian, I picked this up in part, and then I ran with it, and I looked at all the different areas of it, and some of you will see it in this particular book here, Golden Dawn Enochian Magic, the second printing. And I also found some notes that Mathers had written. He inserted the 12 the Enochian names in the 12 tribes, and he decided to extend it a little bit, but not much more. Crowley did probably a far better analysis on it when he looked at the Seal de Amoth. Mathers was going to start in the direction of creating a seal, but never ever got there. All he did was the names around the rim, and that was about it. He never got right into it. And the use of the seal, which I took again and ran with it, was the opening of the seal paper I did. So I did a fair bit of experimentation. I wanted to see where this came from. Was Rigardi right? Was Crowley right? And in the end, I scrapped most of it because I found that I was looking at the GD system from the rituals, and that's the point that I stuck with. And I looked at what fitted into the rituals, how it was done, and when you figured out how it was done, you get an idea of how to prioritize it, which gave you your boundaries of the system. And all these things, which I looked at as an independent basis, backed up what they told me at Ferrara. So the Enochian system, for all it'll suck you in, it'll look at you and you think, wow, what a wonderful system it is. Everything works, the Aries. I did do some, incidentally, some additional research by saying that the 30 ethers, as far as I was concerned, related to the houses of the moon, which is 20, 28 or 29, depending on who you want to talk to. And the final one was the point depart, was when you arrived at where you got, and that was Lilith, who was the angel of the moon or lady of the moon, whichever way you want to cut the cake. So when you put all of these together, they really didn't go that far into it, and he was stuffed. He didn't know which way to jump. When he got to THAM, he didn't go any further. He didn't do anything on the Calvary crosses, which of any interest. Most of the stuff that was done on the Great Central Crosses and the Enochian tablets covered it pretty well. But what they did do was they looked at the God forms, and they did it in two areas, the God forms of the tablets. Now, we're told that the certain squares of the tablets of the Servian squares related to certain god forms who related to certain temple officers. That's part of the papers that you will find. But also one of the most interesting ones is Enochian chess. Now that's when you get a chance to see the god forms and actions and the interactions within them. In the Enochian chess set, you have a paper published in Regardie's Falcon Press edition called Frater APS, which is Fullenberry. And he actually did a very, very good analysis of the god forms from an attraction and repulsion basis, and also that related to the squares as well. That was a little less apparent. And he used that as a strategy by teaching the chess games using the elements as an attraction and repulsion thing. And this was a step up from the paper by Agrippa, which Mathis published, and about the elements and how certain elements blend together and how some go apart. And this is essential for creating a polarity of god forms. So your god forms had a polarity base relating back to the elements as such, and that's how they functioned. And so there was branches into this and branches into that. But essentially, if you're going to look at the Enochian system, before you go, oh gee whiz, oh wow, it works, everything is great, play with it first, work with it, and you'll find that it works just as well as anything along the grimoire or any other thing like that goes. So I don't, as far as the rituals go, they were part of the ritual, the elemental base structure to it, but the ritual itself, as far as the elements go, are very minor from the Golden Dawn. They just call upon the elements. They might do a prayer to the elements at the back, and that's about as far as it went. But you had to learn about how the elements attracted and repulsed each other, which was by another name, by playing chess, which also made you use the chess pieces. And the chess pieces also had that attraction and repulsion formula. It taught you about how the god forms worked. Now these god forms also appeared on the temple floor. You'll see how they appeared on the temple floor in the Nought. Now in the AO, beyond the Nought, we don't have anything, but it'd be absolutely bloody ridiculous to say they had god forms in the Nought and they never had any other ritual. Then all of a sudden I managed to get hold of the analysis, this is thanks to Tony Fuller, of the god forms shown in the summary of the 110 ritual by Mathers, which is part of the THAM paper, and they mentioned that all the god forms there are similar to what is the Nought, and then you've got a couple extra. Well, if you have a good look, there's a bit missing. Now, of course, he, as best of my knowledge and from what I've spoken to a number of people that do research on this, no other god forms are given for any other ritual except the in the Golden Dawn, that is, in the Nought and the 110. But there were a couple of introductions like Metaton and Sandalphon. So it's obviously that when you read the ritual, they talk about a god form, the god form should be on the floor. Now Falcon knew this, and what happened was that in the Stella Matutina, Falcon actually he took these god forms that are mentioned in the rituals and also looked at the tablets and then placed them in the rituals as such. And these were given to the Hierophants. The only people who'd seen were the Hierophants. I had a look at the Golden Dawn version of god forms. There was two lots actually. The first lot came through Jack Taylor, and he made, after I got through my training with him up to a certain point, I started to ask him about questions about what was manifesting on the floor. Then he went to his drawer and gave me out a copy of a god form paper that related to, he said was written by Morwenna Mathers. And I copied it on the spot, and that was I don't think it was Morwenna Mathers. It came by Campbell, who went to England in the late 1920s, early 1930s, and he supposedly got it from Garston. And we also found out some years later that someone from England sent me a copy of the god form that I had, which was prior to any publication, so that they were used. Someone was using them in England at that point. I think it was Garston. That's my that's my opinion. And because they're a little bit too elaborate for Morwenna. But at any rate, there was two lots of god forms, one to the 110 within the Golden Dawn. The AO I don't know anything about, but I'd be willing to bet they didn't. Then we have the SM ones, which had all the god forms were elaborated, and then we have the ones of the SM had two lots. They had the one that came back to Whareroa and in the 1930s, but the other ones that the SM did were already in existence, so there was two lots there. One came from England and one existed before it, which Dr. Falcon wrote. So again, I had a long chat with Tony Fuller over this, who got hold of Frank Salt's notebook on god forms, which the all Hierophants had. And when I mentioned it to Jack, he mentioned that that he had that particular book, but he junked it when Mrs. Falcon gave him this one, the ones that I published in my ritual commentaries, which is far more detailed because it also had the admission badges on the floor, which the other one never ever had. So it can get quite complex because things were going out in different areas. So God forms were important because you got to know that within the rituals there was a polarity of three divisions. There was active, there was passive, and then there was a neutral God form which would work with either one. So there was that developmental aspect, and you got to know that. And how you got to know that was how they actually worked on the floor and the rituals they did it. When I was in Canada about 8 years ago, in Montreal with Martin Thibault, we did a North demonstration, and I actually put the polarity colours of the three pillars, which was you could use either black, white, and yellow, or you can use red, blue, and yellow, which is what we did up there in Canada. And we got to see them move around the floor wearing those colours, and it showed you the polarity actions, how they came in and they expanded and contracted those particular God forms. Now this gave you an inkling of how they worked in ritual, because once you established what God forms were active, which were passive, which were neutral, you saw how the ritual worked. It gave you an additional functionality, and so we apply that in our own teachings all the way through the rituals. The God forms that I got from Jack only were up to about, I think it was about 4-7, never went beyond it. And there was the only way you're going to find God forms is to make your own, which I did for the portal and higher up rituals from the portal up, and make mention of what they did and utilize them that way. And again, polarity is the main key to this. So all of this came back through the Enochian system. So what happened was that when they experimented with it, they became more and more aware of God forms having a particular purpose, and the purpose was higher than the elemental things. It showed you polarity base on the floor. So it was about elements, it was about polarity. So there was two levels of the tablets. One was just elements in a seer, and the other one was the God forms attached to the tablets, which came from the tablets. And what they did then was they looked at the polarity, how they would move in unison and away from each other. And that's an elaborate, sophisticated system within itself. Then you start looking at the God forms on the floor, you look at where they stand, what they represent, how they move from point A to point B, what's near it, what's far from it. So all of these came essentially from the tablets, but they still went back to the ritual. So it came almost a full circle from the Enochian tablets being elemental to the God forms, on to the Enochian chess, back into the God forms of the people on the dais, and into the and on the floor. So all of these areas came into it. And so it became quite a complex piece of work when you start looking at rituals. If you just got Rigardi's book and away you go, well, okay, I tried that at the very beginning, and the amount of information I got from it was wonderful to start me off. But you get to a point, and if you don't get into this, you'll get bored and leave, which a lot of them did. So the Enochian tablets and the Enochian systems within the Golden Dawn really were not that important. Anything within the D manuscripts, I was told, was in the level of a seer, and that came from Campbell. So, as you understand them to be, even the planets are within that level as such. So you're looking at a seer of a seer all the way through, and they won't go beyond that particular point. So there's a limitation of the effect that they can have on rituals, but by their own developmental process of applying God forms to them, they expanded the initial rituals of the ciphers and applied God forms to them and linked them in with it. And so what you had was what they tried to show you when they linked a God form to an Enochian, to an Enochian square, and then if they linked that to a temple officer, they tried to show you the levels of polarity within the temple officers and how they would bounce off each other. And this is how it worked. So while they had a limited ability as a tablet, the Godform application paid big dividends, probably more so than the tablets themselves as such. So I wouldn't get too hung up about the overimportance of it, but most people, when they get the system and see Rigardi's work, they want to do more into that, which I did. I worked pretty hard at it. When Rigardi came out to see me, he said he wanted me to finish the last part of the Enochian system, which he never had a look at. That was the Bonorum, which he started. And I'd already done work on that. And he said, look, he said, I'll send you some stuff over, have a look at it, and see what you can do with it. And when I got the stuff over, it was pretty much a basic outline straight from the D manuscripts. The difference with the Bonorum was that I utilised that to, or Heptica Mystica, I utilised that and joined it in with the 7 days of Genesis creation, because you've got the whole ball of wax. Once you understand that, the whole lot comes together. You can look at the first days of Genesis and have a look at the powers of the king and his ministers and the prince of the days of the week, and it just flows. There's no question that that's where it came from. That's what they tried to do and split it up a little bit. So beyond that, getting into other aspects of the system, I think is okay if you want to do it. You can get something out of it on a personal basis, but if you want to bring it into the Golden Dawn proper, I think there would be some difficulty. There are some aspects of the Bonorum that do work and can be introduced, I think, into the Golden Dawn at a later stage, but certainly as part of a fixture, not the entire fixture in itself. And there's still a lot more in the tablets that we don't know, but essentially what the tablets did was just it named all the elementals in a certain level and said, okay, here's the names that control them. Now this is something interesting. I want to come in and explain a little bit why the tablets weren't adhered to that much. When the first creed of Whare and of SM in general was you took the highest names, and then from the highest names you don't need to do the smaller names as such. But if you want to do the highest names, you can adjust them to the 4 worlds. Now, when you have the highest names called in the rituals, they kick ass. Basically, they get everyone. They're the generals. They organise everyone else, and so. The reality is that when you try and do the highest names and then start calling every other one, you're calling out the general, then you're calling out the colonels, the majors and things like that. Well, that's not going to cut it. You call out the generals, he does the work. That way, top down. When you start to call out the individual names, you're going down to their level to do it, and it's got to come from the top up, not their own level. And this is part of the understanding that the Whare had, so that there was a prismatic viewpoint. That if you called the highest names first, that would cover the entire tablet and cover everything in it, as it should. That's the way it works. And that's part of the problem of not understanding some of the Golden Dawn rituals. And even Rigardi, if you go through Rigardi's book, Llewellyn Publications book, and have a look at his names that he brings out in the Z2 rituals, just have a look at the variation of names. He sort of went for everything that walked and talked. Well, you don't do that in ritual, never did. So he got his stuff from Crowley, who was a good ritualist, there's no doubt. But when you start to understand the principle behind the Golden Dawn system of magic, which is slightly different again to what Crowley did, you understand why they did a certain thing in a certain way and the functionality behind it. Now, some of you may not agree with me, but this is the way it was taught, and what I'm doing is passing on the information to you to use or don't use, whichever really suits your fancy. So when you get to looking at the highest names first and start working through those, you go top down, not bottom up, or you don't mix and match it. That's the way the thing works, and it works all the way through the rituals that way as well. It's most important to understand that principle. So the Enochian system as such has its strengths and has its weaknesses, but it certainly was never given the hype within the Golden Dawn as what it has been given today. They tried to look at it in a certain way to give it a little bit more backbone to the rituals, but all they really were doing is explaining different hierarchies. You know, what do you say? You look at the lowest when you look at the ZAM, you look at the cherubics when you look at the 110, but all of these still come under the three names. The 3 names of each tablet. They all control that. That's the essence of it. And the tablet of union and ritual is just a binding factor which links them all together. I won't say it's a controlling mechanism. It's just a matrix that it sits on. So while they all have their own individual names, the tablet names work best that way by calling the 3 holy names, and you'll get everything moving. Not just one thing, but everything. And the interesting thing about this is you'll get it moving in a balanced manner. And you won't go for those who praise and all varying other aspects of the D system. But that's the way they thought. That's what was taught in free roll. Now, if you want to do it in your own personal work and play with it, that's fine. I did it myself. I can't throw stones at anyone for doing it. But if you want to find out how it works with a Golden Dawn system, it adapts to the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn doesn't adapt to it. And remember, the three colours, if you have a look at the Enochian tablets and you look at the books by Skinner, where you can see the same colours in the Golden Dawn, black, white and red. It's three essential colours of the outer order tablets, and that's the importance of it. So most people would be surprised, but as I said, the Enochian chess system went off into another area on its own, which really again relates to a seer still, using the elemental aspects of Godform archetypes. The idea of the Enochian chess set, one aspect of it, was playing Enochian chess, was to understand the rituals and you understand the temple offices and how they work. You can also, if you look at the chess games and maneuvers, and if you really get your head into it, you can see how they work on the dais as well on each particular level. So all of these, when you look at it, give you a better perspective of the Golden Dawn system with its connection to Enochiana. Some of you will still be fascinated with it. I know that people told me, even after I met the people at Ferrero, I still studied Enochiana because I want to make my own mind up, and that's what I suggest you people do. Don't take my word for it, do it yourself. But if you're going to slot into a ritual, figure out where it is and why those names aren't called first. And you'll get an idea of how things actually work. Well, that's all for today, and thanks for calling in, and I probably get back to you at another time.